Hi, I'm Kerry and welcome to another episode of the Science of B2B. And today we are going to talk about the fact that marketing needs to give up the battle of trying to improve MQL production and conversion. And there's a really great example from history, kind of a sad example from history, about not knowing when to give up. Now, the person you see on the right-hand side of your screen is a person named Hiroo Onoda, and he was an officer in the Japanese army in 1945 when the war ended. He was in the Philippines, and he was a guerrilla fighter. He stayed in the Philippines in the jungle until 1974 when he finally surrendered, in the image that you can see. Now, in the intervening 30 years between 1945 and 1974, he had come into contact with many people, including a number of Japanese people, who had tried to convince him that the war was over and that he should come home. But he refused to believe and accept any of the evidence that the war was over. This is not quite a victimless crime here, because in the interim, in those 30 years, they think he killed as many as 30 people who he thought were either enemy combatants or who were trying to capture him. So not exactly victimless crime here. But Hiroo was not crazy. He wasn't mentally deranged, but he was extremely committed to a cause that was long since obsolete, that no longer applied. And he was highly resistant to the evidence that it no longer applied. But he wasn't crazy. And even after he surrendered, he lived a long and, by all accounts, happy life. He lived till he was 91 and was a productive member of both Brazilian and Japanese society and received a number of awards over the rest of his lifetime. So why is that relevant? Because we have been fighting to maintain this MQL machine that marketing has become, and we've been maintaining that in the face of a lot of evidence that it really doesn't work. It doesn't work for marketing organizations, sales organizations, or, and even most importantly, buyers. So first of all, the fact that we treat buyers, potential buyers, as MQLs, that are just people that we should be chasing down. They're people that we have to overcome, whose resistance we have to overcome in order to get to our goals. That has left buyers very defensive. And I'll show you some evidence in just a second that tells us that they're very defensive. They have long since opted out of being SDR sequence fodder. And here's the evidence for that. One, we know that people simply do not fill out forms in the numbers that we would like. Even when buyers are from organizations that are identifiable accounts that we could sell to, only 2 out of 10 people from those accounts will fill in forms. If they're actually going to buy, so in our surveys, we've asked buyers, when you think about that account, that vendor that you actually bought from, did you ever fill in a form to look at content on their website? Only 3 out of 10 people say that they did. So think about that. The vast majority of people in the accounts that are going to buy from you will not fill in the forms to look at your content. That's got to make you think. But here's some other evidence. Buyers are absolutely in complete control of when and if they engage with you. You've probably seen these numbers before, but buyers are very clear that they do not engage with sellers until an average of 70% through their buying journey. And when they do engage with sellers, they're controlling the time of that 81% of the time. In other words, they initiate contact 81% of the time. But here's the real kicker. It doesn't actually matter whether they initiate contact or whether they're getting calls and emails from a buyer or seller and then they respond to that. If they respond, it doesn't change the timing. It still happens at 70%. The people who say that I initiated contact and the people who say, oh, I talked with a seller because somebody called me or emailed me, it happens at the exact same time, which tells you they only engage when and if they're ready. So we built the whole premise of B2B around this idea that we can cause people to fill out forms, become our MQLs, and then we can chase them down with BDRs or SDRs or sellers, and we can cause them to interact with us and begin the selling process. As it turns out, that's not true. We cannot change the timing of when buyers are going to engage with us. What we can do is increase the likelihood that they'll engage with us and that they'll decide that we're the best vendor to buy from if we engage with them effectively throughout their buying process. not our selling process, their buying process. So what do we need to do? One, creating forms and form fills cannot be the primary goal of marketing. Getting people to fill in a form is not a good goal to have. Getting people to engage with your content, to fall in love with your brand, to understand your solutions, to understand the competitive differentiators of your solution, that's your goal. Also, to make sure that everybody in the buying group for those accounts that you're trying to sell to, that they all understand how you compare and where you are a good fit. One of the best and most important things you can do is make sure that the people who are not your primary targets, they're not the department head, they're not the VP in charge of that part of the organization that's buying from you, but the finance people, the IT people, procurement people, whoever they are, those other influences, make sure that they can get to information about you that's going to make them feel good and safe about buying you. And if you put it behind a form and try to get them to be an MQL, they will not see it. They will not fill out the form. The only way they'll see it is if they get somebody else to fill it out for them. And is that what you really want to base your marketing success on? I don't think so. So everything that you do has to be aligned to measure, detect, and respond, not to individual people, but to buying groups. And that means that you're going to need to see all of their signals, third-party intent signals, most especially the anonymous traffic on your website. And then you need to align all of your tactics to the buying journey. This is really important. The average buying journey in B2B is about a year long. The average sales cycle is the last 1/3 of that, which is about 3.5 or 4 months, right? So the sales cycle begins way after the buying cycle and largely after the buyer has already decided whether you're on the top, middle, or bottom of their short list. So how do you get them to the top, middle, or bottom? Well, one, you never miss when they go into market. You see the signals and you respond to those signals effectively and make sure that you get a chance to get in front of those buyers, again, with content, because unless you know them already, they're not going to talk to you. So you get in front of them, get your content in front of them, and get on the short list. And then prioritize your marketing to that very small segment of the audience that's actually in market. So our data shows that probably about 60% of your audience, whatever your audience is not in market at all. So we don't want to be using our expensive demand tactics with those folks. We want to aim those just at that part of the market that's actually in market. And then we want to make sure that we have content that addresses the questions and concerns of the key members of that buying process, including those folks who can just say no, like procurement, like finance, right? One of the other things that we want to do now is automate as much of the process of delivering the right message to the right people at the right time and use AI to automate as much of that as possible. So having AI agents looking at the signals, noticing when to kick off content delivery to buying groups, notice when to include people that we already know in delivery of content, when to get them invitations to things. All of that can now be automated so that what we can focus on is creating the best possible content and experiences for those buyers, right? So that's really critical. We need to stop fighting this war of trying to get more and better MQLs. What we need are buying groups that are in market and they're preferring us. And if we can do that, then ultimately those people in those buying groups are going to identify themselves to us. And by the way, it's not that you're not going to have any forms anyway. When you have experiences, when you have dinners, when you have wine tastings, when you have webinars, when you have expert sessions that your prospects can sign up for with subject matter experts, they're going to have to tell you who they are. They'll gladly do that when they're getting something of value. But if they're not getting anything of value and you're just putting your content behind a web form, they'll get what they need from Google, from ChatGPT, from your competitors, from wherever, and they'll never know that thing that you have behind that form. All right, so that's it for today on the Science of B2B, and I hope you'll join us next time.